Alright, so at this time we'll be talking about how is learning facilitated. So actually it's very different when we compare this 21st century if we trace back to the previous centuries. Because before we used traditional approach in our educational system compared to this time that we are now into student centered. Compared before, it's about teacher centered. But as we go through our discussion, we will know the difference of the two and how is traditional approach helped us overcome this new approach. All right, so I have here presented to you a picture that corresponds with the words, scrambled words that you can see. All right, so because before, okay, so before traditionalist teachers used to have what we call the systematic phonics, or also known as synthetic systematic phonics, wherein the teacher used to introduce the sound of each letter before the meaning of the word. Say, for example, the word um, cat. That's a noun that represents an animal. Okay, so before they introduce what that word meant and able for the learner to know the word, so they have to introduce first the letter sound. Say, for example, the C stands for K, and A stands for F, and T stands for T. And then afterwards, you will read it as cat. But before, it's different. Like, we really focus into the meaning of the word after its sound. Or it could also be using the four macro skills while listening, the learners, speaking, um, reading, and writing. All right, so let us read what is written here in the presentation. So according to a research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be at the right place. The rest can be a total mess and you can still read it without problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. That's what linguist says. All right, so which is very true that as of the moment, we not only rely on the sounds of each letter, but of course, word as a whole. So we will be deepening on this part as we go through our discussion. Okay, so the three elements at work in the classroom. So what are these three elements that teacher uses in class discussion? First is we have approach. It refers to the general assumptions about what language is and about how learning a language occurs. Okay. Okay. So again, an approach to language teaching has something to do with how language, how knowledge of a language is acquired, or it can also be the nature of language. So examples of approach are integrated approach, behaviorist approach, constructivist approach, and so on and so forth. So actually, constructivist approach, this is what we currently use, but there are still many. But constructivist approach is seems familiar. As we go through, as what I have said earlier, we will dip in when it comes to what is constructive approach is. The second element at work in classroom is Method. So when you see method, it's a practical implementation of an approach. A theory is put into practice at the level a method. Okay, so the theory is put into place. This is a practical implementation of an approach. Okay, so when we say approach, that's the general assumption of uh, theories of teaching and language. When we say approach, this is a practical implementation of a teacher in the classroom setting, where particular skills to be taught, rules of the teacher and the learner in language, and language and teaching and language and learning, and at the same time the appropriate procedures and techniques, at the same time the content to be taught. So example of methods are, we have inductive, um, deductive, drill method, and so on and so forth. But it's there's no the flipped method, which is applicable to the present educational system, wherein because of pandemic, we have acquired the blended learning, or you could also have distance learning. So flipped method is used enable for the learners to have study their lessons at home. So teachers will provide presentations to be viewed by the learners at home. It could also be through video or any other means of um, educational learning. All right, so next is we have technique. Okay, so when we say technique, this is the teaching procedures that are employed with particular uh, in the teaching learning process. So again, approach, this is the theory of teaching and the language. When we say method, this is the way how teacher implement the approach in a class setting. And then technique, this is a procedure and how this approach and method apply in the class setting. So here, technique is actual implementation in the language classroom. So the actual moment-to-moment classroom steps that lead to a specified outcome. So example for that is we have games or activities. That's why our motivation in the 21st century, as teachers considered to be facilitators, so let's engage our learners into techniques, different techniques such as games and other activities that enable for them to conclude what is the lesson about, what is the topic all about. Because teachers are present just to facilitate the learning process of our learners. Again, approach, theoretical framework that supports an instructional design. And then method, teaching design based on a particular approach. And then technique is the teaching procedures that are employed with particular method. So I understood. All right. Next is the lead approach. So when we say lead approach, this is actually one of the 21st approach used in our educational system. A unique learning and development framework that teaches way to master the skills. Okay, so it could a lead approach defines into the following. First, we have lead stands for yourself and others. So as a 21st century learner, it is important for us to stand by our own, like yourself and others, how you communicate, how you collaborate with your friends. But it's quite different from this moment where pandemic arises, that we are not allowed to have to gather or to have face-to-face classes. But this is actually applicable on how you manage yourself with your family members. So lead yourself and others. Next, E stands for effect. So change and growth. So as a learner, it's very important for you to have improvement prior to what you've been learned, which is very important as we go through with your journey. Next, we have align. So the vision, mission, values, and goals. So it's also important for us teachers that we have to stand by ourselves and how we connect the lesson towards our learners and able for this to have change between us professionally and to the learner as well. And vision, mission, values, and goals, it connect to how Department of Education or our educational system um, visualize our learners towards their future and develop, of course, system and strategies. We have new curriculum as we have a K to 12 curriculum is very important for us to follow, enable for the learners to adopt what is to be able for learners to be fully equipped and globally competitive. Okay, so this is under the constructivism approach, which is the present approach we use. All right, so now let's discuss the difference between traditional teaching and constructivism. So traditional teaching and constructivist teaching. So how these two differs from each other. So that's what I have said. Traditional teaching wouldn't be, constructivist teaching wouldn't be realized without the existence of traditional teaching because this is what we learned. This is what we used in educational system before in the past centuries. Like it focuses on teacher-centered, it focuses on chalkboard or paper and pencil text. But we have also to be thankful with traditional teaching because we would not be able to come up the present approach that we have right now without this traditional approach of teaching. So traditional teaching is more on direct instruction and teacher-centered. Students are passive learner, and it's the teacher that directs and controls most of the learning activities. Next is constructivist approach is learner-centered. Students are active learner and just not just recipients of information. The teacher facilitates and guides students to learning. Okay, so again, that's the difference between the two. When you say traditional teaching, it's more on teacher-centered, and then the students are passive learner, meaning teacher spoon-feed the information towards the learner. Unlike constructivist teaching, it's more on learner-centered. The learners are active learner, and then they are the one who construct the information, where the teacher are just facilitator. So I hope that's clear. Next is constructivism. So I have said constructivism is a theory that says learners construct knowledge rather than just passively take information. So as people experience the world and reflect upon those experiences, they build their own representations and incorporate new information into their pre-existing knowledge. Okay, so next we have whole language approach by Kenneth S. Codeman. So this is actually applicable in our present educational system. So when we say whole language approach, it focuses on the meaning of the words presented in a text. Compared to the traditional approach, it somehow, as what I have said, uses the systematic phonics. Okay, so again, it also exposes children to literature and gives them confidence as reader and writer. Students are taught to use critical thinking strategies. And teachers believe that phonics instruction should be integrated into meaningful reading, writing, listening, and speaking activities. So this is very important as of this 21st century that our learners should involve their macro skill to integrate their reading, writing, listening, and speaking activities the teacher provides. So here we have the systematic phonics. So this is the difference, or also known as synthetic systematic phonics. So traditional approach that uses bottom up. So it teaches the children the sounds of isolation and then coaches students to band the sounds together. Example, the word dog. As what I have said earlier, that teacher introduces first the sounds of the letter before the meaning of what the word is meant. To say, for example, the word dog, D stands for D, O stands for and G stands for G as its sound. So therefore, it's different when we trace this to the whole language approach because Kenneth Goldman believes that um, the children should expose us to literature that enables for them to give confidence as reader and writer. Then next is we have modular approach. It's a form of distance learning that shifts the traditional method of instruction to an outcome-based learning paradigm. So the purpose of modular approach is, are first we have allows the students to choose his own learning mode, which is true. That in modular approach, students are given free will on um, where and what time they will able to learn. And then next is allows the students to proceed at his own rate and emphasizes on individualized learning. That's modular approach. Okay, so the advantages of modular approach are first we have self-paced learning according to people's need and ability, and then concerned individual differences. So it's more on learner-centered. Okay. However, it has also disadvantages. So what are these? Okay, so not all students do their modules, which is true. As of as of last school year, I have interviewed some of the learners who used modular as way of their learning. There's disadvantage in a way that our educational system may adapt to what is current, but as teacher, we have to act. What is the problem of that? What is the solution out of that problem? Students also sometimes copy the answers of their friends or their classmates, and then okay. So process approach is the present that our educational system use compared to product approach. It refers to the traditional oriented approach. Where process approach, say for example for this is say for example you are given the learners something to write, or it could also be writing workshop or writing composition. So the way you correct the learners on his um, write up is what we call the process approach. It focuses on the steps involved in creating a piece of work of the learner. Compared to the product approach, it's different. It talks about the output, how teacher delivers the information to be done. So that's why the learner only imitates and copies what the teacher supplies to the learners. So that's all about learning facilitated, and then um, how this lesson important to our present educational system. Well, as of 21st century, it is very important. It is not only the technology develops, but also our education as how it is. Um, 21st century learners and teachers as well is also our part to contribute something out of what is being delivered to our learners. So I hope you learned something out of this. Don't have any questions? Alright, so if none, that's all for this afternoon, and let's call it a day.